Almost every culture has marched to the beat of its own drum. Drums have been part of different civilizations for thousands of years. The earliest drum shells were hollowed-out logs or gourds. Different sizes created different sounds. Today, drum shells are a little more sophisticated, but the beat goes on. To make drum shells, they slice an enormous rock maple log into several boards. Maple is ideal for making drum shells because its hardness allows sound to resonate fully. Each of these maple boards will be transformed into one drum shell. Workers feed the boards to a ripsaw, which cuts them to the correct width. This varies depending on the size of drum being made. Then each board goes into a planer, which shaves it thinner. A worker aligns the board with markings on a saw table. This positions the board to be cut to the correct length. A radial arm saw does the job neatly. Now he sizes up each board in preparation for tapering. He places a board on an angle in a jig and then moves the end against a router cutter to taper it. It takes a few passes to get it just right. The taper needs to be about 15 centimeters long. He thins the other end of the board to the same dimension. These tapered ends will make it easier to bend the wood into a drum shape later. They'll also act as scarf joints, which will fasten the ends of the board together when it's bent round. But first, this board needs some softening up. An hour in the steam box does the trick. It's pliable enough to wind around a hot cylindrical form. Steel banding secures the board to the bending form, where it will spend 10 to 15 minutes. A worker pries apart the ends and applies a generous amount of glue between the tapered tips. Then he removes the shim that was holding the ends apart so that they stick together. He places a wooden guard over the glued joint. This nylon mesh band is a clamp. He wraps it around the drum shell and turns a screw to pull the band tightly around the wood until it reaches 35.5 centimeters in diameter. Then he fastens over a dozen steel clamps onto the joint. All these clamps will prevent any gaps from occurring in the joint as the glue sets overnight. With the joint sealed, the drum shell now spins while a cutter shaves down the edges to make it a true round shell. Then they bring in another cutter. It bores into the shell, making a smooth edge and rounding the inside. He turns the drum shell around to cut it from another angle. As the shell spins, a high-speed cutter shaves the outside from top to bottom. This makes the surface very smooth. It takes about a week to make a drum shell from solid wood, and it'll be able to stand up to a real beating. There's more than one way to beat a drum, and there's more than one way to make one. Earlier, we showed you how they create a drum shell from a maple plank. But a newer technique involves layering multiple plies of wood. This process is called laminating, and you can hear the difference. The laminated drum is an instrument of change. Its sound is crisper than a drum crafted from a single piece of wood. To make one, they layer 11 sheets of maple. Here, a worker glues on the final ply using a special adhesive. This outer layer is luxurious bird's eye maple. Rollers press all the layers together to ensure they stick without any gaps. Then they cut through the overlap to create a perfect seam. A robotic drill now takes over. It drills holes of various diameters. The small ones will hold hardware. This larger one is an air vent. A computerized router then cuts the bearing edges to a 45-degree angle, and a worker sands it smooth. He uses a level surface to ensure that all the edges are perfect. If they're not, the drum heads won't fit properly. He applies an adhesive to the air hole and inserts a plastic vent. Next, he inserts brackets called lugs into the other holes and screws them in. There are 10 lugs, spaced 36 degrees apart. They'll hold the rods that will attach the heads to the drum shell and also enable the drummer to adjust the tension on the heads. Here, he attaches a lever to control wires called snares that are to be strung across the bottom head. It's called a snare strainer. Then he fits a plastic drum head over the bottom of the shell. The counter hoop goes on next. It has little tabs, which he aligns with each lug. He slides tension rods into the holes in the tabs. Using a drum key, he tightens the head to an even tension across the shell. Now he blasts it with a heat gun to shrink the plastic and remove any wrinkles. Now he places another plastic head on the top bearing edge. Since this head is the one that gets pounded on, it's twice as thick as the bottom one. He places the chrome rim on it and tightens the tension rods. These brass brackets will hold the snare wires. He slides them under the snares that are stretched tightly across a jig, putting one at each end. He measures the length, then solders the snare wires to the brackets. He snips the wires on both ends and unlocks each wire from the holding device. When he removes the snares, they're held together by the brackets. He slides a nylon strap into one of the brackets, then attaches the strap to a fixture just above the bottom head. The other end of the snare is attached to the strainer, the lever that will apply tension and release it, controlling its distinctive buzz. For a bigger sound, there's the bass drum. It's made with wooden hoops. They attach the hoops to the drum shell with steel claws. As they screw the claws to the hoop, the drum head is pulled just tightly enough to produce that low-pitched bass drum sound. A sound production indeed.